Somewhere right now, a teenager is selling a phone case they bought for $2 for $8 on an app, and they just made their first $6 of profit before dinner. 100 years ago, that same teenager would have needed a storefront, a supplier relationship, and months of saved capital just to attempt it. Today it took them an afternoon and a phone they already owned. So here's the real question. If making your first dollar has never been technically easier, why do so many people still never make it at all? Start with what's actually changed. For most of history, starting any kind of business required capital before you could even test an idea. You needed a location, inventory, equipment, or a license, often all four, before a single customer ever handed you money. That upfront cost functioned as a filter. Only people with savings, connections, or enormous risk tolerance ever got to try. Today, that filter is almost entirely gone. You can sell a service on a freelance platform with nothing but a skill you already have. You can resell an item you already own. You can post content and get paid through views before you've spent a single dollar of your own. The barrier that used to stop nearly everyone has quietly disappeared for most of the population. And yet, the barrier that remains isn't financial anymore. It's psychological, and it shows up in a very specific place, right before the first transaction happens. Psychologists Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser ran a now famous study in 1966 that explains why that first step matters so disproportionately. They asked homeowners to place a small, unobtrusive sign in their windows supporting safe driving. Almost everyone agreed, since it was such a minor request. Weeks later, researchers returned and asked a much larger favor: permission to install a large, unattractive billboard on the same homeowners' front lawns. The people who had agreed to the small sign weeks earlier were far more likely to agree to the massive billboard than people approached cold. Friedman and Fraser called this the foot in the door effect. Once someone commits to a small action, they become dramatically more likely to commit to a much larger one, because the small action quietly changes how they see themselves. This is exactly what happens the moment you make your first dollar. Before that transaction, you're someone with an idea. After it, you're someone who has actually sold something, which is a completely different identity, even if the amount was tiny. The size of the dollar barely matters. What matters is that a stranger paid you for something, and your brain updates its model of who you are accordingly. This is why the advice to start absurdly small, sell one item, complete one freelance gig, get one paid subscriber, isn't just motivational fluff. It's a deliberate exploitation of a well-documented psychological mechanism. Here's the reframe. Most people picture their first dollar as the smallest, least significant step in a long journey towards something bigger. Psychologically, it's closer to the opposite. It's the single highest leverage step in the entire process, because it's the one that converts an abstract identity, someone who wants to start a business, into a concrete one, someone who already has. There's a related idea from psychologist Teresa Amabo, whose research on workplace motivation identified something she called the progress principle. Studying diary entries from hundreds of professionals across dozens of projects, Amabo found that the single strongest predictor of someone's daily motivation wasn't recognition, money, or even the size of the achievement. It was simply the feeling of forward progress, even small progress, on work that mattered to them. Setbacks had an outsized negative effect on motivation, but tiny wins had an outsized positive one. A small, completed sale doesn't just put money in your account. It becomes psychological fuel for the next attempt, in a way that a perfectly planned but unexecuted idea never can. Now here's the counterintuitive twist. The businesses that eventually become large rarely start by chasing large numbers. They start by chasing the smallest possible proof that anyone will pay at all. Economist and behavioral researcher Daniel Kahneman's work on loss aversion helps explain why this matters so much psychologically. Kahneman's research found that losses feel roughly twice as painful as equivalent gains feel good, which means the anticipated pain of failing at something big looms far larger in your mind than the anticipated pleasure of succeeding at it. This is precisely why people delay for months on a business plan they imagine as a big launch, while barely hesitating to try something small. A small first attempt has a small possible loss attached to it, which your brain can tolerate. A big first attempt has a big possible loss attached, which your brain instinctively avoids, often by simply not starting at all. Picture two people with the same idea for an online store. One spends 4 months building a full website, sourcing dozens of products, and designing a logo before making a single sale. The other lists one item on an existing marketplace by the end of the day. The second person will have made their first dollar, and learned something real about whether anyone wants what they're selling, before the first person has even finished their homepage. The first person is optimizing for looking legitimate. The second person is optimizing for actual evidence. This is what's genuinely different about today's world. It's not that people are smarter or braver than they were a generation ago. It's that the distance between having an idea and testing it against a real stranger's wallet has collapsed from months to minutes. The tools remove the financial barrier almost entirely. What they couldn't remove is the moment where you have to let a stranger judge whether what you made is worth paying for, and that moment still requires you to act before you feel ready. So if you're sitting on an idea right now, waiting until it feels polished enough to launch, consider what you're actually waiting for. You're not waiting for more capital. You already have access to more distribution, more tools, and more potential customers than any generation in history. You're waiting to feel like the kind of person who has already done this before, and the only way to become that person, according to decades of research on how identity and behavior actually interact, is to do the smallest version of it first. Not the perfect version. Not the big launch. Just the first dollar. Everything after that gets easier, because you'll no longer be imagining whether you can do it,